Good morning, folks. It's about 5 after midnight on May the 4th, so it's my time. It's about 4 a.m. GMT time, and we are going to take a look at Forex for the week. I'll start with pound New Zealand dollar, which made not a real large move up in terms of pips, but a rather significant one. We are holding above 2 for the moment, and also above the daily EMAs. So I would like to see a pullback into the daily 200 and for essentially 2 to hold and for further upside. I see both the pound and the New Zealand dollar in fairly weak positions, but I think we'll see the greater weakness coming from the New Zealand dollar, which could give us an opportunity to long on this pair, which is going to be opposed from some of the other pound pairs. We do have the global dairy trade coming out sometime tomorrow, usually in the morning. So keep an eye out for that. It could cause some pretty big movements. And of course, we have the potential for the rate cut on the New Zealand dollar. It's a little bit further out. Pound CAD, I don't have a fib on this pair, but you can see that we failed to break the daily 55, and currently we're right on the daily 200. And if we take a look at the daily chart, we can see that this is a pretty bearish pattern here. Potentially we could pull back early in the week all the way to the daily 55, and as long as that holds, I will excuse me, I will look for shorts. Of course, we do pull back to the 55. I'll definitely want to go to break even before we hit the 200 again. There is a possibility that we just move away from the 200, and if that happens, I'm not too keen to just trade the move away from it from the week. I'd rather see a bit of a move away and then a retest, and then a subsequent move down from there. CAD is doing the best, I believe, out of the commodity currencies, so could provide us a good short opportunity here if we continue to see pound weakness. All right, pound versus the Australian dollar. I've adjusted the triangle a little bit. We have our shorter term line here from last week, which is intact, and from the previous triangle was about there, where we kind of just broke out sideways and we stayed within our range. So I've adjusted the triangle for the daily, and you can see the new top line, and I've also added a new bottom line which extends further out. You can see this line here. So we're definitely still well within our triangle and waiting for that to break, which at this point could go either direction, depending on what happens with the Australian cash rate. It's expected to be cut by a quarter basis point, so we expect that to happen, and for the triangle to potentially break from the downside, depending on what the pound does. We definitely want to see a break below the daily 200 with that. However, if the cash rate remains unchanged, we could definitely see a rather large move to the upside outside of the triangle. Pound yen, again, we had a pretty bullish position over the last 2 weeks. Would like to see a pullback down to the daily 55 and 180 to the long. However, if we start the week moving up, if we take a look at the daily, about 184.30 is a pretty significant top area, and that's definitely going to be a place that I would like to short from. So we essentially have, if we move down first, we can have a bounce off of the daily 55 and then a move up to about 184.30, at which point I'd look to take profit there and look for a short down from there. All right, pound USD, this is also on the daily. We can see that we rejected the 200 pretty well. Currently, we're still above 1.5, we take a look at the 4-hour, from here, this is a pretty decent level, and we can get a pullback even to the daily 55. And if that, the beginning of the week, we could look to long anywhere where we are now to the 55, take profit at the 200, and subsequently look for a short. Excuse me. I think the safer trade, if you are looking to trade in only one direction, is going to be to wait for a retest of the daily 200. As long as that holds, that should provide us a good short to the downside, potentially breaking back below the daily 55 in that move, which could bring us all the way down to the prior low. Euro, New Zealand dollar. If euro strength continues, which I think is definitely short term, but New Zealand dollar is fairly weak, as mentioned. With the pound, we could see a good bounce off of the daily 55 for a long. All right, Euro CAD. Again, I think CAD is doing fairly well as far as the commodity currencies. So I think there's better opportunities for longs here, but potentially we have the daily 55, which isn't too far away from price. I think we're more likely to come back down here in line with the daily 200 and perhaps see a long from there. Again, that'll put price in a pretty tricky position technically. So I think that this pair would be better traded short if we get a break of the daily 55, a bounce off the 200, and then a solid close below the 200 here. Of course, that's going to depend probably on the news cycle this week, so we'll see what happens. Euro odd, if the rate cut does happen, is in a fantastic position to short. We are sitting right on the daily 200 here, and we have a pretty good distance before we hit the daily 55. Of course, we'll have to decide whether we want to take profits there or if we are, likely to see a move down to the prior low. And I'm sorry, I misspoke about the rate cut. If we don't see a rate cut, we're likely to see a significant drop from here. If we do see a rate cut, we'll have to see what happens. We may end up breaking the daily 200, which could give us a setup off that to the long. However, we don't have a whole lot of room before we hit pretty significant horizontal support and resistance. Euro JPY, one of the pairs that I have two fibs on. You can see the shorter term fib from last week's high to low, in which case we would look for longs off of the daily 55. However, I think overall, of course, the euro is in more of a bearish position. You can see that this green line here is actually the 38.2% fib from the weekly. So you can see our 520 pip move actually doesn't regain all that much ground if we look at the weekly. Of course, the daily 200 is going to be a pretty good place to take a short. So if we move back up into there and it holds, look for short down to the daily 55 as the first target. You can see actually on the weekly fib that I have. So of course the daily 200 is going to be the deciding factor. If we do break above there and it holds, I'll look for a couple bounces off there and then a long. All right, New Zealand dollar. I'm not too keen to trade on this pair. Again, we have Aussie cash rate and New Zealand dollar global dairy trade in the next 2 days, and we are pretty much directly between our daily 200 and our daily 55. So while we're inside of that area, unless we establish a range more in there, I'm not too interested to trade, especially since the news can cause us to have pretty significant spikes between those. Australian dollar versus the CAD, again, pretty messy here. I'm not not interested on this pair at the moment. All right, all JPY. You can see I've got the short-term bullish fib here. We are still above the daily 55 and 4-hour 200 and the 4-hour 55, which is not of too much significance currently because of position, the other EMAs and price. If we do get back above the daily 200, we can look for that to hold and long. However, we need to get above 196. I think overall this is more bearish, and I'd like to see a break back below all the EMAs and to get a short from there. If we look at the daily, you can see where we tried to move above the 95.30-ish resistance area, failed, and have subsequently started to move away from that area. So if we go back to our 4-hour chart, if we do break back above the 200 and bounce off of it, the safe bet is to wait for the high to break before we get into a long. On USD, we've pulled back pretty close to, excuse me, so we've pulled back pretty close to the EMAs, which if they hold could provide us with a short-term long opportunity. However, I am interested to short anywhere between 8,000 and 80.50. On New Zealand dollar versus the CAD, we broke below the daily 200 again, and if we stay there, this could provide a pretty good opportunity to short. I think we'll definitely see more strength in the CAD than we will in the New Zealand dollar. New Zealand dollar JPY, pretty messy. I'm not really interested to trade it unless we get another bounce off of the daily 200. New Zealand dollar, US dollar, again, we moved off of the daily 200, which I was waiting for, but of course it had to come last week. So hopefully we will get a pullback, if not up to the daily 200, at least back. Let's up, at least back to the 76, 30, 76, 40 area. You can see where that's been pretty significant horizontal support and resistance. If we go back to the 4-hour, you can see that that is this line right here. So these EMAs that are bunched up here have been more of a pivot for price. They have not been too significant like we see from the daily 200. So I think we definitely could take a short from this midterm fib here at 76.39. USD CAD, we took a bounce that in the last week on, I'm sorry, not the end of the week, then close to the end of the month. We took a bounce off of the daily 200. It's going to be the middle of last week. So again, I'd like to see a pullback to the daily 200 and a subsequent close above 1.2 for a long. We do have the daily 55 to contend with, and that I think is going to be the determining factor for any short side movement. So depending on how the week starts out, if we move up, look for a short from the daily 55. If it holds, probably want to see that tested at least a couple times before taking the short. Excuse me again. Allergies are not friendly this week. Preferably another bounce off of the daily 200 for a long. USD JPY, again, 118.75, 118.50 area has held. We do have still a pretty decent range intact. I don't really like the top so much because we have 121.50-ish, and we also have this line here and here, 120.30. So all of those lines could be potential areas to trade off of, but determining which one could be fairly difficult to the short side. I just prefer that we long in the 118.75, 118.50 area. Euro USD, this is the daily chart, and we're at, we stopped on a fairly significant level here. That is the 23.6% fib on the weekly move. You can see it's the green fib. So if we jump back to the daily, we see that we have kind of a zone here, and it's pretty significant horizontal support and resistance, which we're at the bottom end of that now, where we could see a short. Again, potentially a short-term trade would be a bounce off of the daily 55, but it's pretty limited again to here to about 113 up to about 114.70, I believe. Yeah, 114.70, and then we have the daily 200 just above there. So I think it's pretty likely that price will turn around, probably in this area. Of course, we definitely could see a move up to the daily 200, but so we have quite a few options on this one. The area, I don't know why I deleted the area that I've highlighted here. We're looking for a short in that area, a short from the daily 200, or if we start the week off with a small pullback and the daily 55 holds, we can get a short-term long, which at this point I think is still counter trend, and I will look to take profit at 113. All right, so that is it for the week. Again, we have a pretty heavy news cycle, definitely important. New Zealand dollar news, Australian dollar news. We have NFP. We have any continued news from the Greek situation, and we'll have to keep an eye out for the standard red flag pound news, because I think that that pair is in a pretty pivotal area, and we could go either direction at this point. All right, that is it for me for the week. Good luck, everybody. Happy trading, and keep an eye on your calendar.